This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. More than 200 people have been confirmed dead in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, which struck southeastern U.S. just 1 week ago. Hundreds remain missing and many are struggling to find basic resources like food and water. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
Hurricane Helene has now claimed the lives of at least 223 people. Over half of the fatalities occurred in North Carolina, where floodwaters surged over 20 feet, wiping out entire communities. Hundreds remain missing, and authorities are struggling to identify some of the victims. President Biden traveled to Florida and Georgia Thursday to survey the damage caused by the hurricane.
Families, they lost everything, including loved ones, including family members. And I know it isn't the first time. Just over a year ago, a major hurricane hit these same communities. A couple months ago, Hurricane Debbie did the same thing. 3 in a row. I see you, I hear you, I grieve with you, and I promise you we have your back.
In western North Carolina, private helicopter companies are stepping up to assist with delivering vital aid. Brooke Barzik, co-owner of Aerolux Aviation, described the situation.
It's absolute devastation. Even just this valley through here is decimated. And I think the one thing that stands out the most is even after it had been several days since it had happened, there still was no aid here at all. So we were some of the first people.
They're reaching small mountain communities that have been isolated due to the severe flood damage caused by Helene.
The aid that we're delivering is water, food, a lot of supplies for babies, fuel, and Starlinks.
Barzik mentioned that Elon Musk donated over 100 Starlink units, which they have been distributing to local fire departments that have been cut off and without communication. According to PowerOutage.us, about 757,000 homes and businesses remained without power on Friday, down from a peak of more than 4.5 million last week. On Friday, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp met with former President Trump to discuss outages in the state.
Get power, cell phone towers, obviously, medical facilities, hospitals, 911 centers. A lot of counties like this are self-sufficient in being able to get operability going. But certainly any communication for some of these counties, I mean, there was no power.
Thousands are still struggling without access to water. One resident shared how he has to conserve every drop.
We're dealing with a lot of having to go to water stations and pick up water. We'll take potable water and we'll wash dishes with it or wash our hands, wash our face and our bodies, and then collect all of that into a bucket as gray water. And then we'll take that and we'll use that for toileting, for flushing the toilets and stuff like that.
Vice President Kamala Harris will travel to North Carolina on Saturday to visit areas affected by Helene and to receive an on-the-ground briefing on the recovery efforts. Christina Corona, NTD News.
President Biden took to the White House briefing room to tout the new labor report, brushing off those who are challenging the economic data. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has more.
An uncommon sight in the White House briefing room today. President Biden stood before press with remarks on the economy and the end of the port workers' strike. As for the latest on the economy, unemployment dipped down to 4.1%, though some independent firms are honing in on layoffs. The Challenger report notes layoffs are 53% higher than this time last year. The Labor Department reports 254,000 jobs were added in September, exceeding analysts' expectations in a rebound from a disappointing August report.
Just continued really steady and stable growth.
The nation has now created 16 million jobs since I've come to office, more jobs created in a single presidential term than any time in American history. We averted what could have become a major crisis for the country, and a tentative agreement which includes record wage increases for dock workers and shows the importance of collective bargaining.
However, Republicans have continuously pushed back on these statistics, some saying the administration doesn't differentiate between new job creation and job recovery from the pandemic. Senator Marco Rubio today writing that, quote, 16 of the last 17 reports have been significantly revised downwards, a comment Biden shrugged off.
Anything the MAGA Republicans don't like, they call fake. Anything. The job numbers are what the job numbers are. They're real.
And as the president's first and only term nears its end, Biden fielded questions about the economy, the election, and the heightened tensions in Israel.
The Israelis have every right to respond to the vicious attacks on them, not just from the Iranians, but from everyone from Hezbollah to Houthis.
You expressed concerns about attacks on Iranian oil facilities. How should they respond?
That's between me and them.
But whichever countermeasures Israel does use, Biden noted he feels that they should be careful about protecting civilian lives. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Vice President Kamala Harris is aiming to win more support from union and working class voters. She's making 2 campaign stops in Michigan. NTD correspondent Jason Blair brings us an update from a rally in Flint.
Vice President Kamala Harris made a stop in Detroit before coming here to Flint at the Dort Center. I'm told the venue here holds about 6,000 people, and they do expect it to be at full capacity. Flint is a union stronghold. U.S. dock workers suspended a strike yesterday and reopened East Coast and Gulf ports with a tentative agreement to raise salaries. Both Harris and Trump are trying to earn more union and working class votes. Harris released a statement on the tentative agreement saying, quote, "This step indicates progress toward a strong contract and represents the power of collective bargaining." And quote, "Dock workers deserve a fair share for their hard work, getting essential goods out to communities across America." Many unions have a history of backing Democrat candidates. However, this election, the good Democrats did not get some key nods as usual. This week, the International Association of Firefighters said that they will not back any presidential candidate. A similar announcement was made last month by Teamsters. A senior Obama advisor said that former President Obama will be campaigning for Harris in what they're calling a 27-day campaign sprint. According to the Harris campaign, Obama will be starting next Thursday, with the first stop being Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Eric Schultz, a senior Obama advisor, said, quote, "President Obama believes the stakes of this election could not be more consequential, and that is why he is doing everything he can to help elect Vice President Harris, Governor Walz, and Democrats across the country." Poll averages by Real Clear Politics here in Michigan are showing Harris and Trump basically tied, Harris having a slight lead of less than 1%. And another announcement, Vice President Harris will be visiting North Carolina on Saturday to survey damage by Helene, as well as give updates on relief efforts. Reporting in Flint, Michigan, Jason Blair, NTD News.
Former President Trump is campaigning in North Carolina today after a visit to hurricane-hit Georgia. NTD's Chris Baugh brings us more from the grounds.
I'm here in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where former President Donald Trump is about to kick off a town hall at the Crown Coliseum. Now, this is former President Trump's 7th visit to the great state of North Carolina since he accepted the Republican Party's nomination. Right now, Real Clear Politics has Donald Trump leading Kamala Harris by about 0.6% on their polling average. A New York Times poll recently has Trump up by 1%. Marist poll has both candidates tied. So it's a very tight race here in North Carolina. Remember, back in 2020, former President Trump only won North Carolina by 1.3%. Earlier this afternoon, the former president was in Evans, Georgia, where he spoke to officials there about the devastation caused by Hurricane Helene. Here's what he said.
I have no doubt that whatever can be done is going to be done. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of effort, and it's a very heartbreaking situation. We're going to go to North Carolina now, and we're going to see some of our friends in North Carolina, some very good friends, and they have just been totally devastated. They've never seen anything like this. The farmers got hit very hard, and I guess they got hit just as hard, or maybe, is this worse, or is this of equal? Probably worse. Probably worse.
So just west of here, there's a lot of devastation, especially in Asheville. I have a reporter friend up there, and he's been shoveling mud out of his house for about 8 days now. So it's a really, really rough spot. Tomorrow, I'm going to be in Atlanta, Georgia, following the Trump bus tour. And that kicked off this morning. It's going through Sunday. And then Vice President Kamala Harris is also expected to travel to North Carolina tomorrow. She'll be out west to talk about Hurricane Helene and meet with some of the voters here.
The all-important battleground state of Pennsylvania is the focus in an unprecedented election year. Residents of Butler County shared their thoughts on former President Trump's return tomorrow, just a few months after he was shot.
I think a lot of people around here have faith, and they believe the same. We're not going anywhere until it's our time.
This is a big turning point in the history of this country.
They're very, very quiet about how, very hush-hush about how they're going to do the security. But the main concern of the people that I talk to is very, very sad about Corey. They don't talk about Corey.
It should not have happened. The way it happened was wrong. The security was not there. Like I said, my son watched the guy on the roof crawl. They watched him shoot. That should have never happened, but it did. But as far as the community now goes, I have family members, friends, everybody's going to the rally that I know. So I don't believe that it's deterred anyone.
It's a little nerve-wracking, of course, what's transpired the last couple months. It's like anything can happen.
It's about Corey. The justice for Corey is a movement right now, and we're going to get the justice for Corey. And Donald Trump coming back and more memorializing Corey, that's great for us. I
believe in guardian angels, and I do believe sitting there and seeing him shot like that, yes, God has a plan for Trump, and he absolutely was spared for some purpose and reason, and hopefully it's to become the 47th president.
Florida Governor Ron Desantis says he plans to send the National Guard to Florida's ports to make sure goods are moving. We explore the action's legality during a strike that was just suspended. Here's the story.
The Florida National Guard and Florida State Guard will be deployed to critical ports.
Florida Governor Ron Desantis said Thursday that he wanted to send soldiers to help at Florida ports. Florida's National Guard, a part of the U.S. military that can help during disasters, and Florida State Guard, the state's own defense force. Desantis said the move would help resume operations at the ports to bring in goods for the victims of Hurricane Helene. The hurricane has brought devastating flooding.
It's going to hit the pool though right here.
And destroyed homes. Florida port workers have been striking, preventing goods from moving in.
To have this happen in a way that could negatively impact people that are reeling from a Category 4 hurricane, that is just simply unacceptable.
The strike has been suspended. Port workers are now back on the job. But would it have been legal to send in the National Guard? The National Labor Relations Act, created in 1935, gives workers the right to strike. Using the National Guard to replace workers could be viewed as undermining that right. Unions could pursue legal action. On the other hand, governors have the power to deploy the National Guard during emergencies. Emergencies such as Hurricane Helene. In the end, courts would need to decide the legality. Government military forces have intervened during strikes in the past, most notably during the Pullman strike of 1894, where President Grover Cleveland sent federal troops to break up striking railroad workers. In that case, the courts favored the government over the union and even sentenced union leaders to prison terms for contempt.
Israeli forces have reported significant gains in their ground offensive into Lebanon, and Israeli intelligence has led to the destruction of a weapon supply route to the Hezbollah terrorist group. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest.
On Friday, Israeli forces reported killing 250 Hezbollah terrorists in the previous 4 days as they push forward with their ground offensive into Lebanon. Israel also said that 20 of those killed were Hezbollah commanders as they continue to go after the leaders of the terrorist group. Israeli troops have also been conducting raids in southern Lebanon and battling terrorists entrenched in buildings near the border. And similar to the war in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah terrorists also appear to have embedded themselves among the civilian population, keeping these weapons in a bedroom. And other weapons were found in this living room, which had a picture on the wall of the late Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, who also served as a religious figure. But Hezbollah terrorists continue to fight back. On Friday, they launched about 100 projectiles from Lebanon to Israeli territory. And Israel's air defense systems continue to shoot down many of them. Although some missiles still make it through, as seen at this vehicle repair shop in northern Israel, which appears to have taken a direct hit, damaging cars and equipment. But where is Hezbollah getting their supply of weapons? On Thursday, Israeli intelligence directed their air force to strike an underground tunnel that connects Lebanon to Syria. Israel said the 2-mile-long tunnel was used to smuggle large quantities of weapons from Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israeli forces also reported striking weapons storage facilities and terrorist infrastructure sites in the area. Meanwhile, Israel said its forces struck a group of terrorists in the West Bank as they were about to conduct an attack against Israel. Members of Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad were killed in the strike.
I was sitting here with my brother and nephew. We were talking, we heard a plane here, and we heard a whistling sound. A few seconds later, I heard a huge explosion. Everything exploded, the rocks and the windows smashed and reached where we were sitting.
And in Iran, the country's supreme leader and also religious leader led the Friday prayers for the first time in years. He said their recent missile attack on Israel was legal and legitimate, as Iran continues to wait for Israel's response. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Moscow today strengthening its ties with the Taliban. This as Russia accuses Ukraine of killing an employee at a nuclear power plant. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the Russia update and a warning. The following footage may be disturbing for some viewers.
An explosion in a car killed an employee of a nuclear power plant on Friday. Russia is accusing Ukraine of having planted a car bomb. The victim used to work at a plant in southern Ukraine, which is currently being controlled by Russia. The head of the plant commented, saying an attack on employees ensuring the safety of the nuclear facility is a reckless, outrageous step. This comes just 1 day after Russia says its military intercepted a Ukrainian drone near another nuclear plant in Russia's Kursk region.
Kyiv continues to play with fire.
Also on Friday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited the Sumy region, which is right next to Kursk. He thanked the troops for their efforts in the Kursk incursion.
I want you to know that Kursk operation helped to motivate those who are giving us aid packages, arms from abroad.
In Moscow, meanwhile, Russia's government is removing the Taliban from a list of terrorist organizations. That's according to Russian state media. Russia's foreign minister now wants other countries to also change their approach to Afghanistan.
We strongly urge Western countries to take responsibility for the post-conflict reconstruction of Afghanistan, to lift sanctions and return Kabul's stolen assets.
He added that Western nations should not return to constructing military facilities in or near Afghanistan. Congressman Ryan Zinke recently spoke about what he called a triad of evil being formed, which is also being seen in the Middle East right now.
I think it's coordinated. We should look at the larger picture of Russia in Ukraine. We see China, looking at Taiwan. And one should suspect that this is a coordinated attack and we face a new triad of evil.
He added that the alliance of nations such as China, Iran and others could lead to a global conflict. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Here's our legal correspondent Arlene Richards with the latest on the election-related lawsuits being filed by Republicans in the battleground state of Arizona.
You all may remember that in 2020, Arizona courts rejected numerous election-related lawsuits filed by a host of individuals and groups, including former President Trump's campaign and the Arizona Republican Party. The top issue? voting machines. In particular, Trump's team alleged that machines failed to properly count votes. Now, fast forward to this year, Arizona, with 11 electoral college votes, is one of just a few states that could tip the balance in favor of either presidential candidate on November 5th. It's one of the border states, and as you know, immigration is a top issue this election cycle. The Republican strategy here, as in other swing states, is to take preventative measures to avoid problems they believe cost Trump the election in 2020. Now, many of their lawsuits aim to remove non-citizens from the voter rolls and ensure that election officials are strictly enforcing the rules. Democrats have responded, saying these efforts are violating federal laws that bar officials from removing voters in the 90 days before an election. And on that note, Arizona's Supreme Court rejected a lawsuit filed by Maricopa County election official Stephen Richer against the Secretary of State. Now, Richer, a Republican, argued that nearly 100,000 voters should receive only a federal ballot. And this is because a 20-year-old glitch in the system resulted in those voters not verifying their citizenship. The Secretary of State argued the voters shouldn't have to be held accountable for the county's mistake. And the judge agreed. The judge ruled that the delinquent voters should have full access to the ballot, including federal, state, and local races. Now, both sides were celebrating on X, and even Richer said, "Thank God." Now, this is a quick case that was described as friendly because it was intended to clarify the law. Richer's move for clarity comes after a conservative advocacy group filed a sweeping lawsuit that challenges all 15 Arizona counties' practices for removing non-citizens from their voter rolls. Now, that case is still ongoing. Now, a similar case decided by a federal judge blocks Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes from using a new provision in the election procedures, which would let him certify election results even if a county refuses to sign off on its own results. Now, that provision was challenged by the America First Policy Institute. And I should note the new provision was created because of problems after the 2022 midterm elections. And at that time, 2 officials from a largely Republican county had delayed the certification due to allegations of election fraud. Now, if the new rule is applied, Fontes, who is a Democrat, could potentially exclude all votes in a given county. The Trump-appointed judge, Michael Liberty, said the rule would give Fontes nearly carte blanche authority to disenfranchise the ballots of potentially millions of Arizona voters. But last month, the U.S. Supreme Court shot down Republicans' bid to keep a proof of citizenship law. Now, under that law, registered voters would have to document their U.S. citizenship in order to vote. If enforced, thousands of voters would have been barred from casting a ballot in the November presidential contest or voting by mail. But the court did allow the state to enforce another part of the law, and that applies to potential voters, those who have not yet registered. Now, those voters do have to document their citizenship during voter registration. Now, there are some other cases that are still ongoing, to include a Republican case challenging the state's maintenance of its voter rolls, a case challenging 2 provisions of the 2023 Election Procedures Manual, and of course, the state's indictment against 18 individuals allegedly involved in a so-called 2020 fake elector scheme. Again, Republicans are filing a number of lawsuits across the country ahead of the election, primarily in swing states. They're targeting voter rules and practices that could allow hundreds of non-citizens on voter rolls. But Democrats are not remaining passive. They're fighting back, mostly on defense, but also filing some lawsuits of their own. Tiffany, back to you.
A new measure to ban non-U.S. citizens from voting will be on the ballot next month in several states. NTD's Sam Wong was out at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. to hear from voters.
Where are you guys from?
Washington State.
And how about you?
And Oregon.
Washington State. Connecticut.
I currently live in Illinois. Baton Rouge.
I'm from Washington State.
Massachusetts. Bristol, Virginia.
And by what means do you guys plan on voting this year?
Washington State is all mail-in ballot. Oregon is that way as well.
By mail? In person. In person. Early vote at the library where I live.
And we do early voting.
starting October 18th.
I plan to vote at the poll. I'm also a conspiracy theorist. I don't trust mail-in votes.
We chose early voting because it was extremely convenient where we live in Virginia.
Right now, we're seeing multiple states, they're putting a law on the ballot in November. So they'll basically restrict non-citizens from voting in the election. So what do you make of this measure, the fact that they're putting it on the ballot?
Not allowing dreamers and people that have been here for a really long time citizenship or voting rights is highly inhumane.
I'm going to say if you are not a citizen, which is what you're supposed to be to vote, you probably shouldn't be voting.
And they live here, so they have a stake in a voice.
Putting a law in that says, okay, we're going to obey the law that already exists, but we're just going to go through the paperwork and all that to reinforce what is already in place.
You know, the question is, why couldn't they enforce it without putting it back on the ballot?
Why do they need more laws against something that's already illegal?
Whether you vote Democrat or Republican, it's got to be legal, and they have to. And if it means ID, they got to enforce that.
I served in Vietnam. My father served in World War II. You know, we paid the price for our privilege to be citizens, and they haven't. They just jumped the river.
With a little over 30 days until the general election, the leaders of both parties in both chambers of Congress are on the campaign trail, but with different objectives. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson is on the campaign trail to keep his Republican majority and to retain his gavel in the 119th Congress. Johnson has outlasted his predecessor so far, Kevin McCarthy, and is scheduled to visit 24 states in the month of October. His main message is on the economy.
The survival of the American dream depends upon our victory. Republicans have a plan to stop the bleeding of inflation, to remove the parasite of socialism, and to cut out the cancer of overregulation that's making our economy so sick.
On the Democratic side, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries was in the state of Arizona campaigning for the presidential Harris-Walz ticket. Let's remember that former President Donald Trump is leading in the polls in the state of Arizona.
We're ready to elect Kamala Harris, the 47th President of the United States of America.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries' social media activity has focused solely on the presidential campaign, with tweets like the one this Wednesday saying Kamala Harris and Coach Walz will bring about a brighter future for America, onward to victory. And in the Senate, Leader Chuck Schumer is likely to lose his majority and has already signaled that he will prioritize judicial confirmations during the lame duck session of Congress. Currently, Schumer has managed to confirm 213 Biden judicial nominations and is hoping to surpass the 236 confirmations during Trump's presidency. And lastly, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is not wasting his last days leading the GOP conference. McConnell called for immediate supplemental assistance to Israel in a statement saying, "It is time to replenish Israel's supply of critical ammunitions. It is time for the world's leading architects of terror and their proxies to face severe consequences." Republican senators will elect their next leader after the November 5th elections. Senator Mitch McConnell has been leading the GOP conference since 2007. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Election Day is just over a month away. Along with the presidential race, a handful of California Republicans are in fights to keep their congressional seats against Democratic challengers. 6 competitive races in California could determine which party controls the House. NTD's David Lamb reports.
Control of the U.S. House can switch to the Democrats if they flip 5 Republican seats in California and not lose any other competitive races. Republicans currently control the House with a narrow 220 to 212 majority out of the House's 435 representatives. The California battleground could decide who controls the House and, by extension, how far the new president's mandate could reach. That's because the state is home to 6 of the 38 most competitive House races, according to a Reuters analysis, and 5 of those seats are held by Republicans. One of those races is in an agricultural district between former state lawmaker Rudy Salas and Congressman David Valadao. This is Salas's second challenge against Valadao, a 5-term incumbent who beat the Democrat by 3 percentage points in 2022. Polling from the University of Southern California, Cal Poly Pomona, and CSU Long Beach shows Salas with a 4-point lead. Other close races include Democrat Will Rawlins, who's tied with GOP Congressman Ken Calvert, who's held the seat for more than 30 years. Republican incumbent Scott Baugh holds almost a 4-point lead against Dave Min. Derek Tran and Rep. Michelle Steele are virtually tied, and so is Rep. Mike Garcia and challenger George Whitesides in LA County. Christian Groves, a professor at USC, says a strong turnout for Democrats at the top of the ticket could knock out several of the Republican incumbents. The polls include the latest results from September with a margin of error between 4 and 6%. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
Joining us now to break down the numbers from the jobs report and why they are being met with skepticism is Senior Research Fellow with the American Institute for Economic Research, Jason Sarens. Jason, thank you so much for being here. Great to have you. To begin, break down for us the key takeaways from the latest jobs report.
Sure. Well, 250,000 jobs is a large number, and it's 100,000 more than economists expected. So it is a good number, and it's good news for the economy. However, we also shouldn't overinterpret that number because, as we've seen, some of the revisions in the past have been quite large. It is just one data point. So we don't know how this number is going to be revised, and we don't know what next month's number is going to be. So if you thought the economy was doing poorly, this isn't going to make you think it's doing well, but it should cause you to think the economy is doing a little better than you thought it was.
And what can we take away from the numbers on full and part-time jobs?
Yeah, well, what we see there is that a lot of the new employment has been in part-time jobs, and so that's a reason again to kind of think that this number is maybe not quite as good as the headline would suggest. But again, it is a positive number, but it's not something that's going to revolutionize our view of the economy.
Now, to your point, the report faced much praise and criticism today. One vocal critic is Republican Senator Marco Rubio. In a social media post, he accused the report of being politicized. He said 16 of the last 17 reports have been significantly revised downwards once the media has amplified the numbers. Now, a number of economic analysts shared this skepticism. Tell us, what has the scope of revision been with these reports? What does the Labor Department say accounts for this?
Yeah, I mean, some of the revisions have been quite large. We saw in the early summer, late spring, some significant downward revisions to those numbers after they were released. Now, the claim is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics approaches these numbers objectively. They're really trying to get a read on the state of the economy. These numbers are extremely important for many observers, not only in financial markets, but also in the Federal Reserve. So it's important that these numbers be accurate. And what might be happening is that some structural changes in the economy have just made it harder to predict what the jobs numbers are, that these surveys might not be quite as accurate as they used to be in the past. For instance, we've had a surge of immigration over the last 2 or 3 years. And it's possible that it's harder to survey that population, and we're getting a kind of less accurate read on the economy as a result of that.
And in your view, are today's numbers to be trusted as reflective of the actual U.S. job market?
Well, I think what we need to say is, these numbers could be revised. They could be revised up. They could be revised down. Some of these revisions could be large. It's a single data point. I would say don't overinterpret it. What we have seen over the last few months is that people are less willing to quit their jobs. We have seen a decline, an overall decline in the last 3 or 4 months in job growth from the situation certainly a year ago. So the evidence still leans toward the job market is softening. The economy is weakening a little bit. There's still some risk of recession, most economists think. And I don't think this number alone is going to change that. But it does perhaps cause the Fed, for example, to lean toward not cutting rates at their next meeting or cutting them by a smaller amount than they otherwise would.
Expanding on that last part, this month's jobs report is receiving extra attention after the Fed cut interest rates last month. Now, the Fed has suggested it's less worried about inflation now, so it wants to stimulate the economy and help the jobs market. What does today's report mean for the Fed?
Yeah, I mean, this means that the Fed is probably less likely to cut rates. They're less likely to think, oh, we can declare victory on inflation and we can fight unemployment now. They will probably want to wait and see if one of the reasons for this growth in jobs is that inflation has gone back up, which would be bad news and imply that they need to hold rates steady or maybe even start raising them again. So I think this puts the Fed into more of a wait and see mode. What we've seen in the markets is that investors think that as well. Bond yields rose, which suggests that traders believe that rates are going to be higher than they otherwise would be.
And going back to the accuracy of the jobs numbers, lawmakers announced last week that they're launching an inquiry into the Labor Department's Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is after it significantly overestimated the number of jobs created last year. What do you expect will come from this inquiry?
Yeah, I think presumably they'll talk to the economists who work at the BLS and try to get a read on how their models work and how their sort of survey methodology works, because there's a lot that can happen in how you weight survey respondents and kind of derive from your survey sample an interpretation of the whole economy. So I think they're going to take a close look at the methodology and really try to find out ways to improve it. And my guess is that what's going on at the BLS is not some sort of political manipulation of the numbers, but that their survey methodology could be updated to get a more accurate and more precise read of what the job numbers truly are. And so hopefully they make some progress on improving the methodology.
Jason Sarens, Senior Research Fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
California's governor announced new measures to tackle homelessness. This includes over $100 million in funding, as well as increased accountability for local governments. NTD's David Lamb reports.
In a state grappling with homeless encampments, California's Governor Gavin Newsom on Friday talked about accountability and funding for tent cleanups and shelters.
We need to redemocratize our streets and do it in a compassionate way with our values intact, support the people that are out there and the underlying causes, but we need to take back the streets.
The Democratic governor announced $131 million in funds for these 12 cities, ranging from Los Angeles to Sacramento. 6 other communities, such as Riverside County, will also get funding. It's receiving more than $12 million to be used on encampments along a local trail. Sacramento is receiving $18 million. The San Francisco area will obtain nearly $8 million, and Los Angeles gets $11 million. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development estimates that more than 180,000 people in California were homeless in 2022, the highest of any state, accounting for 28% of the nation's homeless population. The state may claw back funds if local agencies don't follow homeless and housing requirements. Also discussed was removing jurisdictional boundaries and reimbursing local governments for cleanup efforts. According to the governor's office, Newsom has invested more than $27 billion into addressing homelessness. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on right now, but let's start in baseball as the New York Mets won their wild card series in dramatic fashion last night with a 9th inning home run by Pete Alonso. What's next for them?
Their nemesis, the Philadelphia Phillies. But that was quite a blast by Alonso. I was actually shocked it went out only because it was such a line drive. I mean, it didn't look like it was hit very high, but it was hit so hard. It was like a rocket off his bat. So the next round, that's the division series, that starts tomorrow. Mets play the Phillies. I think this is going to be an entertaining series. Philadelphia's had some playoff success the last 2 years. Guys like Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber leading the way. But the Mets have been very resilient thus far. Alonso's blast was one of the franchise's biggest biggest home runs ever. And it came just 3 days after Francisco Lindor hit a huge one just to put them in the playoffs. I think the Mets prevail here. Now we've got 3 other series, including Shohei Ohtani and the Dodgers facing the Padres. The Dodgers have had a number of disappointing playoff runs of late. I really don't see Ohtani reversing that. I think the Padres are going to win there. Meanwhile, the American League, the Tigers have been on fire for like over a month now just to get to this playoffs. I think that continues here against Cleveland and they win there. And finally, despite being a longtime Kansas City Royals fan, I don't see them beating New York in their vaunted Juan Soto, Aaron Judge lineup. Maybe they prove me wrong though.
Well, moving to NHL news, the league kicked off its regular season today in Prague as the New Jersey Devils defeated the Buffalo Sabres 4-1. Now, what's the league's interest in playing these games overseas?
Yeah, expanding the fan base. And Europe has plenty of hockey fans, especially in like Finland, Sweden, the Czech Republic. It's similar to what the NBA did with China. If you get a big enough foreign fan base, then you can sell the media rights over there as well. And the media rights, they are the biggest revenue stream in sports. So these 2 teams will play again tomorrow as part of what's called the NHL Global Series. They'll also have a pair of games in Finland next month between the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers and Dallas Stars. Now, meanwhile, there are other NHL games on tonight, but these are preseason games. The rest of the league doesn't start their regular season until Monday. Now, also this offseason, the Arizona Coyotes have moved to Utah, where they're simply known as the Utah Hockey Club. They'll play their first game on Tuesday night in Utah against the Chicago Blackhawks.
Looking at college football this weekend, there's no top 10 showdowns like we've had in previous week. What matchups are you looking forward to?
Yeah, if you looked at this week's schedule, before the season, you probably circled the Clemson versus Florida State matchup tomorrow as the big one. I mean, these 2 teams were both ranked in the top 15. They've both been going back and forth winning the ACC, but the Seminoles have really struggled this year, a 1-4 record. I thought they'd regroup after their 0-2 start. They lost to Georgia Tech and Boston College on nationally televised games, but they really haven't. They just got blown out last week by SMU. I don't know what to expect from them anymore. Now, elsewhere, the only top 25 matchup, Missouri at Texas A&M. I think the Aggies pull the upset there. And I also think Ohio State versus Iowa should be a good one. Iowa is always a tough out. Ohio State, though, is loaded. I think they pull away in that one. And finally, in the SEC, Ole Miss at South Carolina. The Gamecocks, their only loss to LSU was just by a field goal. I think that's going to be a very close one. Meanwhile, they had no problem with Kentucky in week 2. It's all part of a loaded SEC schedule.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.